An extremely dangerous provocation. The European Union has condemned Friday's violation of Estonian airspace by 3 Russian fighter jets. Estonia has requested urgent talks with its NATO military alliance allies after the incident.
September 19th, 2025. 3 Russian jets crossed a NATO border in broad daylight. They stay there for almost 12 minutes. In the Cold War, this is how wars start. No flight plan, no transponders, no radio contact. So how did NATO outsmart Russia's fastest interceptor without firing a single shot? For months before those jets showed up, the Baltic didn't feel calm anymore. It felt like something was closing in. Russian drones slipped into Polish airspace. Sirens screamed in quiet towns that never thought they'd hear them for real. Wreckage washed up on cold Baltic beaches. Romania reported strange intrusions of its own. Every time NATO reacted, fighters took off, drones were tracked or dropped, statements came out, and everyone snapped back into ready mode. On the surface, it looked controlled, but each incident pushed just a little bit further. In Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, it stopped feeling like random glitches. It felt like someone was walking the fence, step by step, testing, timing, and taking notes. Then came September 19th. 3 MiG-31 Foxhounds lifted off from Russia and headed toward Estonian airspace near the tiny island of Vindloo in the Gulf of Finland. The MiG-31 is a huge 2-seat interceptor built to run down bombers at extreme speed and height, a descendant of the MiG-25 that once scared the West into creating the F-15. Modern versions, like the MiG-31BM and MiG-31K, carry the Zaslan M radar and can be set up to launch the Kinzhal, a nuclear-capable air-launched ballistic missile based on the Iskander. And Tallinn, Estonia's capital, sits less than 100 miles from the Russian border. So 3 Foxhounds moving in that direction are not lost. They're a signal. On this flight, the jets filed no plan. Their transponders stayed off. They ignored civilian air traffic control. Then, they crossed into Estonian airspace and stayed there. Not for a blink. For about 12 minutes, in this world, that's a very long time. Long enough to see who scrambles, which radars light up, which sectors talk to each other, and how fast the whole machine wakes up. Estonia called the move unprecedentedly brazen and summoned Russia's top diplomat. From Moscow's side, it looked like a cold, careful probe. Step over the line and watch closely to see if NATO is just talking tough on camera or quietly showing how it would fight. Here's where things change from the old Cold War pattern. NATO didn't treat it like a one-off intercept in the 1980s, with a pair of jets racing up on afterburner and a lot of shouting on the radio. It leaned on something it has spent years building, a shared real-time picture of the sky from the Arctic down to the Black Sea. In the Combined Air Operations Center at Uetten in Germany, controllers watched those 3 contacts long before they touched the border. They saw them inbound, dark on transponders, flying a track that pointed straight at Estonia. The instinct 20 or 30 years ago would have been an instant scramble and frantic calls on every frequency. This time, there was no rush of panic. There was a playbook. Over the Baltic, an E-3 AWACS orbited with its radar dish sweeping the airspace and turning raw returns into clean tracks, pushed straight back to the CAOC. Higher still, a global Hawk-class surveillance drone collected imagery and listened for Russian radars and radios flickering to life. Other NATO sensors on the ground and in orbit added context. Who was transmitting, on what frequency, from which area. All of that information flowed into the same network, the same consoles, the same common operating picture. On the ground at Amari Air Base in Estonia, Italian F-35A Lightning IIs were already on station as part of NATO's Baltic air policing rotation. The Baltic states don't field their own fighter fleets, so allies take turns guarding that airspace. For years, that meant F-16s, Typhoons, and similar jets charging out with their radars lit. With the F-35, the role changes. It's not just a fighter, it's a stealthy sensor hub. When the order came, the Italian F-35s took off without fanfare. No big radar spikes for Russian sensors to latch onto, no dramatic radio calls on open channels. Their ANAPG-81 radar can operate in low probability of intercept modes, and their electro-optical and infrared systems can watch the sky passively. From the MiG-31 cockpits, the air ahead looked empty. From inside the F-35s, the picture was crisp. Every sweep of the MiG-31's Zaslon M radar left a unique trace in the spectrum, frequency, pulse spacing, scan pattern. Each Foxhound was effectively signing its name in electronic ink. The F-35s recorded those emissions and pushed them over encrypted links back to the CAOC and sideways to other aircraft. That's where Sweden came in. JAS-39. Gripen fighters on patrol in the wider region linked into the same network. They didn't turn on their own radars. They didn't broadcast on open frequencies. They simply listened and received. Through Link 16 and other secure connections, Swedish pilots saw the same 3 tracks on their displays that the Italian pilots saw. Position, altitude, speed, and behavior, all built from sensors the Russians couldn't detect. To the MiG crews, those Gripens didn't exist. No radar beams, no voice calls, no obvious signatures. In reality, they were sliding into ideal positions with full awareness of the situation, ready if things escalated. At that point, it stopped being 3 jets wandered over a border and turned into something else. A live comparison between 2 ideas of power. On one side, Russia's MiG-31s brought raw performance, high speed, big altitude, and long-range R-37 air-to-air missiles designed to hit large targets like tankers and AWACS from far out. In an older playbook, that combination of speed and reach was the definition of dominance. On the other side, NATO didn't answer with a faster airframe. It answered with a denser, smarter network. Modern Western doctrine starts with a different question, not who's quickest, but who understands the battle space first and who can share that understanding fastest. Italian F-35s crept into the area as stealthy scouts, quietly pulling in data instead of announcing themselves. That data didn't stay in one cockpit. It was shared across the force, turning every plugged-in jet, ship, and control center into part of the same brain. Gripen gained even more from that picture. Their Skyward G infrared search and track system can passively detect and track targets by heat, while the AWACS electronic warfare suite is built to interfere with and manipulate hostile radars. Fed with F-35 sensor data, the Swedish fighters could have moved into ideal engagement geometries without ever emitting a radar pulse of their own. To the MiGs, the sky still seemed clear. It wasn't. Then there's the missile piece. Russia's bet with the MiG-31 is, we go higher and faster. NATO's counter, especially on platforms like Gripen, is our weapons stay lethal deep into the fight. Meteor, the ramjet-powered air-to-air missile carried by European fighters, doesn't sprint hard and coast until it loses energy. Its engine can keep pushing, maintaining high speed late in the engagement and creating a large no-escape zone. In a shooting war, those networked Gripens could have built beyond visual range firing solutions on all 3 Foxhounds using only off-board data, information from F-35s, AWACS, and other sensors the Russians never saw. NATO's air policing rules kept weapons safe. Visual identification is still required before any shot, especially over crowded borders. But everyone involved understood the geometry. If political leaders had lifted those constraints, the fastest jets in that slice of sky were the ones already sitting in a bad spot. While missiles stayed cold, the other half of the contest moved into the electromagnetic spectrum. The MiG-31's big radar is both its strength and its weakness. To see far, it has to transmit hard, and that makes it loud in electronic terms. Once NATO has a clean recording of those emissions, electronic warfare specialists can build jamming profiles tailored to that specific radar. Digital radio frequency memory jammers can capture the pulse, alter it, and send it back to create false targets, wrong ranges, or gaps in coverage. In a real conflict, Gripens and dedicated NATO EW aircraft could turn a MiG-31 scope into a maze of ghosts, multiple fighters appearing from impossible angles, missile warnings overlapping, friendly returns vanishing without explanation. The ground-controlled interception links that Russian doctrine traditionally leans on could be disrupted or flooded with bad data. The Foxhound is a product of late Soviet thinking. Rely on a powerful radar and central guidance to control the intercept. NATO's answer is distributed sensing and distributed decision-making. From the Russian cockpit, that difference doesn't feel theoretical. It feels like the sky is turning strange. The jet is still fast. The altitude is still high. The engines are still pushing hard, but the displays start disagreeing. Threat receivers light up and the radar can't see what they're screaming about. You key the mic and get static. You change frequencies and hear nothing. You don't know how many fighters are out there or where the danger's coming from. Somewhere in that empty-looking air, stealth jets and fourth-generation fighters are calm, coordinated and fully briefed, backed by AWACS drones, ground stations, and allied command centers all sharing the same view. Russia bet on having the fastest interceptor. NATO bet on having the smartest network. Over Estonia that day, you could see which concept actually held the upper hand. The timing made the lesson even sharper. Just days before, Russian drones had pushed into Polish and Romanian airspace, forcing NATO to think seriously about gaps in its eastern defenses. Out of that pressure came Eastern Sentry, a mission aimed at tightening surveillance and response along the whole eastern flank. More fighters moved forward. German Eurofighters, British Typhoons, Danish jets, Czech helicopters, and additional ships with strong anti-air capabilities took station in nearby waters. At the political level, EU leaders began talking openly about a drone wall from the Baltic to the Black Sea, a network of sensors and point defenses meant to handle unmanned threats without wasting expensive long-range missiles. Everyone knew you couldn't keep burning multi-million euro interceptors on cheap drones forever. But bringing down several Russian drones with manned fighters still sent a clear signal. NATO was alert and willing to act, not just complain. The MiG-31 incursion fit right into that pattern. Russia's wider approach is simple. Keep probing with bombers, fighters, drones, and covert tankers, and watch what happens. See which air bases launch, which radars activate, which parts of the network respond. At the same time, keep these incidents in the news until audiences farther from the border start to tune them out. If people in bigger capitals begin asking whether all those deployments and exercises on the eastern flank are really necessary, Moscow has already scored a political win. The more often it can cross lines without a strong answer, the easier it is to argue that NATO's red lines are flexible. That's why a very different episode from 2015 still sits in planners' minds. Back then, a Russian Su-24 crossed briefly into Turkish airspace near the Syrian border. Turkish F-16s shot it down with an air-to-air missile. One Russian pilot was killed after ejecting, and for a while, it looked like a much bigger confrontation might be coming. Instead, both sides leaned hard on diplomacy. Relations froze, then slowly thawed, but the takeaway was clear. Bringing down a Russian aircraft is not unthinkable, but it's a door you only open if you're ready for everything that follows. Over Estonia, NATO chose another path. There were no flames on live TV, no wreckage sinking into the Baltic. Instead, the alliance ran a very public demonstration for a very small number of people. The MiG crews, the officers in Moscow, and anyone paying attention in Allied capitals. F-35s and Gripens, showed that they could detect, track, and effectively box in 3 of Russia's fastest jets inside NATO airspace without pulling a trigger. The Foxhounds turned back east, knowing they had been seen from the moment they approached, watched the whole way, and escorted by fighters they never visually acquired. From a deterrence perspective, that's a sharp message. NATO showed it could control the engagement without giving Russia an easy excuse to shout about escalation or claim victimhood. The real payoff, though, didn't live in that single day's headlines. It lived in data. Every radar sweep, every attempt at radio contact, every burst of emissions from those MiG-31s is now sitting in NATO databases, tagged and analyzed. Next time a Foxhound powers up its radar, electronic warfare crews won't be working from guesswork. They'll already know its preferred settings, how its patterns look under pressure, and where its blind spots tend to be. That feeds directly into updated jammers, smarter seeker heads on future missiles, better mission planning software, and refined tactics for stealth and non-stealth fighters that might meet the type again. Instead of relying on parade footage and rough estimates, planners now have real measurements from a live encounter. For Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, that translated into something you can feel. These are small states with limited forces, tucked against a much larger neighbor. They've spent years arguing that their security is not a side quest. Watching Italian F-35s, Swedish Gripen, German and British jets, AWACS crews, and multiple command centers all respond in a coordinated way to one violation showed that their airspace is treated as alliance airspace. It also sent a clean signal to Moscow. There is no buffer zone here. Crossing into Estonia means crossing into NATO, and even an incursion wrapped in denials draws a joint response. For Russia, the lesson was less comfortable. The MiG-31 is still a formidable piece of engineering for its era, but a fast interceptor with a big radar and heavy reliance on ground controllers doesn't automatically dominate a sky full of stealth jets, fused sensors, and modern EW. Staying dangerous now means being harder to detect in the spectrum, sharing information quietly across platforms, and fighting effectively even when your main command nodes are jammed or cut off. NATO has been building around that idea for decades. Russia is still trying to stretch concepts born in the Soviet period over a battle space that has changed shape. Here's the bottom line. Over the Baltic, Russia sent 3 of its quickest jets to send a warning. NATO replied with something quieter and ultimately more dangerous. An invisible web of sensors, stealth fighters acting as forward scouts, 4th-generation jets acting on shared data, and electronic warfare tools that can turn a powerful radar into a liability. No missiles were fired, no dogfights played out over the water, no debris splashed into the sea. But from the moment those MiG-31s crossed into Estonian airspace to the moment they turned back for home, they were never really in control of the encounter. The alliance didn't just guard a border. It showed that in modern air combat, the side that sees first and shares fastest wins long before anyone squeezes a trigger. If clear, no-nonsense breakdowns like this help you make sense of what's behind the headlines. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive.